I started calisthenics at home in my bedroom during COVID in the attempt to try and build as much lean muscle as possible. I'm also an accredited exercise scientist and coached almost 1,000 people over the years to do the exact same and build some crazy strength, but also their dream physique. And if you think you cannot build your dream physique and a crazy amount of lean muscle with purely your body weight, you are 100% mistaken. We do not need any equipment at all. All we have to do is slightly manipulate certain exercises to really bias a lot of those muscles and stimulate as much growth as we possibly can. So let's get stuck into it. So guys, the very first muscle group we're going to be starting with is triceps, and there are a host of different ways that we can target the tricep, not just these tricep dips that we're doing now. But obviously tricep dips are going to be great to build up those triceps, and we can also make these slightly easier by adjusting our foot position. Just making sure you're trying to get as deep as you can by getting the shoulder in line with those elbows as you come down and squeezing up all the way at the top. We can also do chest dips, but we can try and bias our triceps when we're doing them. And the way we do that, instead of kind of leaning further forward and pressing up like we normally would with a chest dip, what we can do instead is keep our torso further upright and make most of the movement happen by shifting our elbows backwards and coming back up. So all we're trying to do is just trying to keep our chest proud, shift our elbows backwards, squeeze back up. And that is quite a difficult variation, and it really helps bias those triceps. We can also do skull crushes essentially with our body weight. This is quite an advanced exercise, so definitely do this once you've already kind of at the stage where chest dips are super easy for you and all the rest of it. So what we're trying to do is essentially crushing our skull, but we're trying to get our forehead just below where we're touching at the chair and exploding back up and squeezing our triceps at the bottom. Making sure you're trying to keep our hips straight, try not to flare up too much or flex in. Keep it straight, get that forehead below, get as deep as you can, squeeze back up. As I said, very difficult movement. And of course we have push-up variations, and the best way to try and bias our triceps is to go with those closer grip variations, as well as diamond push-ups are great. Close grip push-ups like this are also good. But what we can also do is kind of have come a little bit further away in terms of our position, and we shift our elbows back and forward and come back up. Pretty similar to those skull crushes, but this is a slightly easier variation. So hands slightly forward, elbows back, and shift back up. So to target our biceps, generally we do need access to some form of bar so we can do rows. However, there is a bicep push-up that does hit the bicep in more of a stretched isometric position. Not going to be fantastic for building muscle, but it does essentially target it. So to really isolate and target those biceps, we do need access to some form of pull-up bar or row bar. You don't necessarily have to have one of these P-bars though. You can head to a local park and find any bar there, or you can even use any form of pull-up bar or rings as well and do rows like this. But essentially what we're doing here is bicep rows. And what we want to focus on doing is rowing while keeping our elbows forward. So we're not pulling with our elbows down. So we're not trying to drive our elbows forward. We're trying to keep our elbows fixed and move with our shoulders. So elbows fixed, hips fixed, move with our shoulders up and come back down. And you should really feel your biceps absolutely firing at that top position there. Just really think about driving your elbows forward, not backwards. So the difference between this, elbows forward, to this, elbows back, is a huge difference between how much your biceps are firing. So chin-ups are also a very good way to bias those biceps and really get those stimulated, but we can manipulate our joint angles to really make sure we're stimulating our biceps slightly more than our upper back. And how we do that is with hollow body chin-ups. What we're really focusing on doing is trying to pull down and keep our elbows forward and keep our upper back in a neutral position, rather than trying to focus on driving our elbows back and arching our upper back. Then we're just targeting slightly more of our upper back. So the shoulders or the deltoids, there are a host of ways where we can target the shoulders. One of the best variations by absolute far in all of calisthenics as well is progressing with your pike push-ups. You want to make sure that you are competent with your push-ups already, but then from there we want to start to target by getting our shoulders a little bit more piked. You can start slightly further away and just focus on pushing on this path. It is a difficult exercise to get right, so making sure you focus on your form and eventually start progressing to getting those hips slightly more piked and getting into that position. From there, we can start to progress by elevating our feet and eventually even doing wall assisted handstand push-ups, and then all the variations beyond that. Now here's a secret to making that pike push-up an even better exercise to build as much muscle as possible and really take those shoulders through a large range of motion, and even better through that stretch position as well, which we know is so good for building muscle. And an easy way to do that is just by increasing the elevation. You don't have to use parallettes if you don't have access to them. You can literally use a couple blocks, even a couple books, just to increase that range of motion very slightly. It'll make a big difference. So another exercise that really biases those shoulders are planche exercises. However, with planches, we know they're simple whole exercises. So they're hitting the muscle isometrically, just meaning that they're not moving. And that isn't gonna be great for building muscle. So what we can do is we can take these planche variations and do them with a push-up. So we're taking those shoulders through a decent range of motion. We can also change our body position to not only bias triceps, but we can do it to bias our shoulder position. And we do that by doing more of a planche bias dip. It is difficult, but what we have to try and focus on doing is just simply having a little bit more of a forward lean and go up and down on that path. That way, since we have that bit more of a forward lean, we're hitting those shoulders slightly more than we would our chest and our triceps. And we don't need these parallel bars. Don't forget, you can use those chairs if you don't have access to it. If you can't tell already, we're obviously moving on to chest. And yes, push-ups are a great exercise to hit those chest muscles, but how can we make it even better? So increasing the range of motion once again is going to be the best way to make this push-up so much better at optimizing that growth. Simply because we're getting that extra range of motion and that full stretch on the chest throughout each rep. And obviously if you don't have access to parallettes like I do, then you can obviously just use any block or a couple books to help increase that elevation. We also obviously have chest dips to really smash that chest, and this is obviously a great exercise, but there's a way we can kind of manipulate it to still hit those chest muscles even more. What you want to focus on doing is a slight forward lean, but this time flexing at the hips and bringing your legs slightly forward. So this way we're kind of pushing up on a little bit more of a horizontal path rather than completely vertical. So slightly more horizontal, and that'll really stretch that chest out. We can also do flies as a chest variation. Excellent way to grow the chest. Don't even need rings. As you can tell, I'm just using a rope. Can't find my rings. But either way, you want to start with those hips nice and flexed. Stretch the chest out as far as you possibly can, and then bring it back in and squeezing at the top. Obviously, if you can get rings to TRX, it might be a little bit easier. And if you want to adjust the intensity, the more horizontal and deeper you go into it, the harder that exercise is going to be. So moving on to the abs now. And obviously we know we can smash those abs with our body weight, but how we can manipulate our joint angles to once again get the most out of that crunch position and really flexing and extending those abs. What we want to focus on doing is moving through our hips. So when we're doing an exercise like any raise variation, we don't want to have our hips fixed in the position. That way, what's happening here is our hip flexors are isolating that movement. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if we do want to target those abs, we want to think about shifting our hips forward to crunch those abs, as that is what the movement they do. So you can slightly flex at the knees, really focus on drawing those hips forward and as high as you possibly can with obviously decent control. To progress that, obviously start to lengthen those legs out as much as you can. If you don't have access to a pull-up bar to do those hanging raises, you can do them lying, but to progress even further, as they will get a bit easy, what we can do is the exact same thing off some form of dip bar, a couple chairs, whatever, and raise up the exact same way you were doing before. If you want to make it a little bit more oblique focus and hit those side abs, what you can do is focus on trying to draw your knee to the side and lift up with your opposite hip. And you can do that exact same variation hanging as well. So those raise movements are probably a little bit more lower ab dominant, and a way to slightly bias those upper abs a bit more is to now do the opposite and use our shoulders as the curl. So our hips are being fixed here and we're crunching up as high as we can and controlling it back down. Before I finish off with those back exercises, there are some leg exercises that we can touch on, and we can really find exercises to bias our quads, our hamstrings, our glutes, and our calves. In terms of smashing those quads, pistol squats, sissy squats, quad bias lunges like Bulgarian split squats, and reverse Nordics are all excellent exercises. For the hamstrings, we have hamstring curl variations, and we can progress them onto Nordic curl variations, and arabesques are also excellent. For the hamstrings, we have hamstring curl variations that we can do. To hit the glutes, we have glute bridges, obviously progressing them to single leg glute bridges. We can also do a glute bias Bulgarian split squat. where we focus on keeping that shin nice and vertical and shifting back and forth with their hips. And reverse deficit lunges are great for that too. And for calves, single leg calf raises are an excellent exercise. In terms of building muscle with calisthenics, I do highly advise probably using weight, at least eventually, as the progressions somewhat are limited. With upper body, there are countless progressions that we can continually do to really stimulate growth as they continuously do get harder. But with the legs, it is hard to keep progressing, and adding weight for that axial load and that bone density, I do believe is somewhat important. Not essential, you can definitely get by without it. However, I do recommend it. So finishing off the muscle groups with our back muscles, and how can we hit those back muscles without a pull-up bar? Yes, it is going to be quite difficult, but there are variations that we can do. We can use chairs, and we can use absolutely anything that we can actually do a pull-up off. That includes doors and random overhanging things. Just make sure it is sturdy, you don't neck yourself. Or you can obviously just simply head over to your local park and do pull-ups. Just be careful because there are kids around. Don't hit a kid on the head like I did a few years ago. Probably not ideal. However, the muscle groups that we're trying to target with obviously doing these pull-up variations are our upper back muscles, more meaning our rear delts and our traps, and obviously our lats. And we'll also talk a little bit about that lower back muscles as well, your back extensors. So starting with our lat muscles, what we want to think about doing when we're hitting our lats is exercises that pull those elbows to the rib cage. So exercises that are going to be great for that are chin-ups and hollow body pull-up variations. And when you're doing this, you want to really think about pulling those elbows to that rib cage. Obviously, if you lack the strength to do pull-ups, banded pull-up variations are obviously an excellent way to kind of move past that and slowly work up to obviously doing a body weight when you can. Moving beyond pull-ups, this is quite an advanced variation, but a great way to really load those lats is with single arm pull-up variations. We can use a band to start with, and what you want to focus on doing is obviously coming from a complete dead hang and trying to get that opposing shoulder to touch that bar. As I said, very difficult exercise. Move through this gradually. So the lats can obviously also get hit with row variations, but it's the exact same thing. We want to focus on pulling toward our rib cage rather than pulling with our elbows flared. That way, we're really biasing those lats to hit the movement. And we can progress this on to single arm rows as well. So the final exercise for the lats is actually front lever variations. But as we know with the planches, any things that are just simple holds aren't going to be great at building muscle. So what we can do is we can take those front levers and do a raise variation. So we're taking those lats a full range of motion. And once you're confident with that, you can start working through those front lever variations as well and start slowly lengthening those legs out until you can eventually do it in a straddle or even a full front lever. So now we have a little bit more of the upper back muscles that we can try and use different arm parts to slightly bias. And I group the rear delts and traps together as they will work kind of similarly in terms of that arm path. And throughout this whole video, when I say bias, it just means slightly recruit more of those muscles than other muscles. It doesn't mean that when we're hitting those chin-up variations that are slightly more lat bias, that our upper back isn't working, or vice versa. It just means they're slightly adding more to the movement than they would otherwise. However, when we are trying to bias those upper back muscles a bit more, we want to think about pulling on an arm path. Somewhere around 75 degrees is pretty good. And that's the same with a vertical pull or a horizontal pull, meaning a row or a pull up. So what we call them are bodybuilder pull-ups, but this is where we arch our back, flare our elbows, and focus on getting our chest to the bar. This way we're really retracting our elbows back and taking those rear delts and traps through that greater range of motion. And obviously it's the same again with those rows, but here we're thinking about trying to slightly pull on that 70-degree arm path that we're speaking about. But instead of progressing to single arm, I progress to straightening your feet out completely and then trying to elevate your feet off some form of chair to get that extra difficulty. With those bodybuilder pull-ups, obviously use bands if they are too hard, but if it gets to a point where they are too easy, you're getting well over 10 reps, you can start to progress to archer pull-ups now. This is where you start going side to side and then start slowly lengthening out that opposing arm until you're in a full archer pull-up. And just as we did with our chest, we can also do flies, but for our rear delts. All I've used is a rope around a pull-up bar, but you can use any variation you want, a towel, whatever. And same again, the more horizontal you are, the harder it is going to be. For the lower back and targeting those back extensors, reverse hypers and any form of 45-degree or 90-degree back extension is going to be great at loading those muscles. So that concludes all of the muscle groups. If there's any exercise variations that you think I've missed or some are better than others, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't joined yet, I don't know what you're doing, the biggest free calisthenics community, get coaching support, masterclasses, programs, all the rest of it. I'll see you in there. Like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is. Have a good one.